Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters. After a group of criminals kidnap the ballerina daughter of a powerful underworld figure, they retreat to an isolated mansion, unaware that they're locked inside with no normal little girl. Yes, folks, this is our raw reaction review for Abigail. Well, Luke, I gotta say, Abigail has been nothing but surprises for me this entire run. When it was announced, I was completely shocked that the folks behind the latest two Scream entries weren't going to be hopping directly onto Scream 7. No, they were going to be doing a new project, and then that project surprised me with the fact that it was dubbed at the time a Universal Monsters Dracula's Daughter style film, so big surprises there. And then the trailer dropped, and I was like, this is the movie? Very, very strange. And I got to say, I was a little turned off by it because I think my expectations were a little something different. And now we've gotten to see the film. And I got to say, I am surprised again. But Luke, how are you feeling about Abigail?
I'll say I'm surprised as well. I was intrigued. Us not being too happy with the last two Scream installments to see Radio Silence kind of pivoting and doing something a little different. Didn't necessarily care if it was going to be related to Universal Monsters or not. Just kind of have that unique voice. I am a big fan of Ready or Not, so I was excited to kind of get back into that. To speak about Radio Silence and not have Ghostface come into the conversation. So, I was excited. Trailer dropped. It looked a little paint by numbers, pretty basic to me. It wasn't anything that wowed me. It was something that I thought maybe would just be, filed away as something I had seen in 2024 and would never really be a talking point for me. But I gotta say, after sitting here and watching the film, it was surprisingly good and had a lot of teeth to it.
Yeah, there you go. I think in the thumbnail I'll be saying Abigail has gore and quite a bit more, and that was just the sentiment that was running through my head as I watched this film. I don't think it's perfect. I think that there's been a lot of hype coming out of things like the Overlook film festival. A lot of people got to see it there, and they were just raving about how this is like the next great vampire film. And although I got to say, this is definitely a vampire film for the books. I don't necessarily know if the praise that they kind of went out there giving it. There were a lot of comparisons to Fright Night. There were people saying it's the best one since The Lost Boys, and it's good. It's really good. Like, don't get me wrong, but again, I think that if you set those expectations for people, I don't think it quite gets there. I think that it could grow on me and become something that I watch pretty regularly, but I don't think that it's quite at that level for me.
Yeah, this one has such a modern element to it, obviously. So we need to be a little further removed from this one to really say, is it going to have that same charm that Fright Night has or Lost Boys has? I got to say, though, going into this one, it does have the charm of the cast. This is a
Mhm.
stat cast. It's no secret. We have a lot of heavy hitters in here. Dan Stevens, Melissa Barrera, Angus Cloud, and I'm guessing his last performance. I'm not entirely sure if there's anything else coming out post mortem for him, but I got to say, a lot of great performances. The cast certainly has a charm to it. There's so much camaraderie here. I love the element of them kidnapping Abigail and them being these seedy characters amongst themselves. Looking at the idea of Abigail, I was like, you're already kind of giving us that hook and you're laying it all out on the table. But I got to say, this thing has a lot more that it does deliver. And I got to say, looking really the focal point being the cast of just the charm that they have, the camaraderie, just the way that these actors breathe life into these characters is so great to see. And it really does carry a lot of the film for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think the cast here is top notch. I honestly, I was not. There was no doubt in my mind that Melissa Barrera was going to, be a standout here. She works really well with the Radio Silence team. Clearly, they brought her over from Scream. They have some kind of a connect with her. Obviously, a lot of people like to associate Samara Weaving with them. All we need to see now is just Melissa Barrera and Samara Weaving on screen together in a Radio Silence film of some kind, and I think that we've kind of completed the holy trinity there. And I enjoyed her performance, but damn, do I have to say, I know that I'm biased as hell when I say this, but Dan freaking Stevens, so good in this. He's playing such a different role than I've ever seen him do. And I loved him from start to finish. I love the things they do with his character. I love how in and out you are with him, and in the sense of like, he's kind of an asshole at some points, but he's also kind of likable in others. And I just thought that he was just a whirlwind of entertainment. I just didn't know where I was going to land on in the final moments with him. And I got to say, I was impressed throughout.
Yeah, Dan Stevens really brings that tension for me where I want, opening up when you're being introduced to these characters, and yes, they're all seedy characters. He just seems a little seedier than everyone else, and I want so badly to like him. And then you kind of are like, okay, I can get on board with him. And then it starts creeping up. The hair on the back of your neck starts, should I trust him? And I love that because it is throughout. And even when we get deeper and deeper into the story of Abigail being this vampire, and it's still like we still feel like, I don't know, maybe Dan Stevens is the one that's so untrustworthy, which is such a fun element that they do bring in here. But I gotta say, the cast really does work well together. Kevin Durant for me,
I was going to say, yeah, he's another huge standout here.
so much charisma. I love the hook of his character. He adds some comedic elements and not an overabundance of comedy. I think sometimes, when you get in the Scream franchise, there some of that radio silence comedy didn't really hit for me. But I gotta say, with Abigail, for the most part, I think this really does hit.
No, I agree. I think that there's a nice balance here. There's a couple jokes that don't land for me. I really do love the camaraderie, like you're saying. I mean, Dan Stevens has a line that absolutely killed me between him and Kevin Durant, and actually, it was Catherine Newton, who's also just wonderful in here. We just talked
Perfect.
about her in
Lisa
Lisa
Frankenstein.
Frankenstein, but like Jesus, she's so good in this. I loved her character of just how like kind of like you could tell she's definitely like the kid of the group as far as like stepping away from Abigail, who isn't necessarily a kid, but like she's just so like not experienced with this. She's never gotten her hands
Along for
into
the
quite it.
ride.
Yep, really just having a fun time. And I don't want to put any disrespect on Angus Cloud here. I'm not too familiar with his work. But from the stuff that I have seen, I gotta say the only thing is like is that his about his normal performance about what he gives here? Is that kind of like his shtick of kind of like how he talks and stuff? Because like I felt like from the stuff I've seen in Euphoria, he felt very samey. It's not bad, but it's just one of those things where I liked his character, but I just was I didn't know if there was like some kind of range or anything that I'm missing.
No, Angus Cloud, I would say that's a standard performance. If you notice, he does have a scar in his head. He did suffer traumatic brain injury as a child. So that
Oh,
speech,
okay.
that's his actual speech. He does talk like that in everything that he does. And I think for me, if you're familiar with Euphoria, I did get to check out Your Lucky Day. It's part of his charm for me. It's where I'll say the delivery absolutely works for me. The way that he's got a couple lines in there that really hit for me when
He does,
he's
yeah.
talking to Melissa Barrera. So that is his typical performance. I can see why maybe that might be a sticking point for some people. But for me, it does add to his charm. But yeah, that is his normal that speech that he does. That is how he actually talks.
Okay, because yeah, I was just a little bit like now that I have that information, that does help me kind of navigate it a little bit. Because like I said, I'm not very familiar with his work at all. So when I went into this, I was kind of expecting, hey, this is a different setting than the stuff he's normally in. So I'm really curious to see what he brings his character. And I thought, okay, this really seems like the stuff I've seen from Euphoria. So again, not super familiar. So knowing that, I get it now. Okay, it's not, it isn't just like that's his version of acting. It's just his speech patterns and stuff. clears some things up for me. But I did enjoy his character. I didn't think that he was on screen quite enough for me. I thought initially, not to spoil anything, that maybe he'd be there a little longer. But it's one of those things where I did quite enjoy the camaraderie. He had a kind of this wild card element to the group where he didn't quite feel like he was supposed to be there, and they kind of call that out. But like I felt like it was just such a funny dynamic. I really liked it a lot, especially one scene involving a bike. I got quite a kick out of.
And that's what I like, because you did kind of allude to them saying maybe he's not fit to be there. There's this kind of almost inner working politics, where you kind of lay out everyone's background, or so to speak, of what you believe is their background. And I did like that, where they kind of add a little more to those elements, where it could have just been, these characters on screen and we're not really focusing on too much. But I did like that they kind of gave them, sometimes when you have such an ensemble cast like that, they kind of get lost in the shuffle. They all kind of blend together. But each performance for me really stuck out. And you could feel the difference in their background, even though it's more so about the situation rather than the actual character's background. But you did feel that coming through those performances. So it really was enjoyable for me.
I agree. And I gotta say, moving into our vampire here with Alicia Weir, I thought that she did a fantastic job. I mean, Jesus, for such a young actress, like she really plays that range very well. I mean, you see it in the trailer when she has to switch. She's very intimidating. There are a lot of sequences, especially one involving a cage, where she's got a little bit more dialogue and a little bit more range, but it's twisted, it's dark, and I really thought that she seems like she's going to be a promising star up and coming here, especially in the horror space. Because yeah, she really knows how to turn on the twisted nature of this vampire character really well.
Yeah, she really did sell it. And I love the ballerina elements here. You see it in the trailer, and they kind of follow through with that throughout the film. There are some elements in there for me that kind of not necessarily take me out of it, but just felt a little forced when we're using the ballerina movement during chase scenes and things like that, that I was like, I don't know if that necessarily fits. But then there are other elements in there, particularly with our Catherine Newton character, that I do think kind of really work rather well. So it does add to that eeriness to it, and it does differentiate from other typical vampire flicks that we did see. And another portion of this that, regarding the Catherine Newton character, they added a lore here that I haven't seen or am not familiar with in terms of the vampire lore, that I thought was rather interesting. And I like that they're trying to do something different, bring something new to the table here. I would have loved to have seen that a little expanded upon. Yes, it does kind of is the theme a little further throughout the film, but it's never kind of portrayed as we do see probably toward the middle of the film. But I rather enjoyed that.
Yeah, I actually have seen that element be brought up in vampire stuff before, but not in the way that they portrayed it. The way that they do it is very unique, and I think that it's one of the big positives I want to give this film as a whole. I think that my wife went and saw it with us, and she's very big and very particular about her kind of vampires. She reads a lot of vampire books and things like that. There's some of her favorite creatures when it comes to like dark mythology, all that stuff. So she's very opinionated about it, and she had some gripes about it. But I gotta say, her gripes were the things that I found made the vampires so unique, and a lot of those were the structure of their mouth, the teeth. It feels very 30 Days of Night is one of the things that I get there. I love kind of the reaction that they have to a traditional way that you would take out a vampire. You're used to seeing it one way, and the way they do it here is very extravagant, I must say, and very exciting. Gorehounds will love it. And yeah, I just thought overall the way that they handled the vampires, in the fact that they kind of turn left when you'd expect them to turn right in a couple different spots, and I feel like that added a kind of a fresh nature of just uncertainty and unease to me, because I couldn't quite figure out, okay, what's on the table and what's not. That's dancing around spoilers, of course.
Yeah, I like that element as well. Sometimes, with flicks like this, you can kind of get bored if it's kind of so academic for you. But I really did feel like they brought that uncertainty of you don't really know exactly what's going to happen or um, what characters are going to make it out, what characters are not going to make it out, and what that ending is going to look like. So it did keep me, it kept my interest. Throughout the film, I think this is nearly 2 hour runtime, and we always discuss runtimes on here, but it's something where this one did breeze by for me for the most part. There's a little extra narrative for me. You touched on it a little bit with Abigail in a cage, where there was a little extra narrative that I don't know necessarily that the film needed. I think from a writing perspective, when you're writing that on the page, you feel the story needs it, but to see this cast breathe the life in and see how well they were interacting, that you could almost strip down a lot of this and just be bare basics and just let these actors play. Now, it wasn't something that really killed the film at all. I just thought it was a little extra, something that I don't know necessarily that we did need, because I'm totally fine taking this film face value without really any twists or turns.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we kind of sorely missed from the Scream entries that the folks here at Radio Silence were able to bring back was the abundance of creative gore. I really think that Scream, not to say that there isn't a lot of gore in those, they just felt very safe. They felt very samey, as opposed to something like Ready or Not, where I feel like they had a lot of really creative kills in there. They bring that back here. There's a lot of really creative, interesting ways of getting carnage on the screen, and I really thought that that was a lot of fun. And I think that if you are looking for a vampire film that brings the blood, that brings the fun and the uniqueness, I gotta say Abigail checks all of those boxes for me. I do think the film does drag in a couple of spots personally. I don't think that it's necessarily due to poor pacing. I think that I just kind of there's a moment in this where I'm expecting us to kind of start kicking things into gear, but I feel like then we choose to sacrifice that for more character time, which is fine. I'm all for it, but it just you get to kind of a point where I'm like, well, what are we doing here? Is this going to be like the thing? Is everything we've seen in the trailer kind of the last half hour or so? But it does catch up. It does get moving, but it did leave me feeling a bit lost and a bit awkward in the way it was paced for, I would say, probably about 15 minutes.
And I guess necessarily, I didn't necessarily feel too much of an issue toward the beginning. I will say toward the end, I was eager for things to wrap up, and it seemed like they maybe tack on a little extra that I don't know necessarily that we needed. Maybe an appearance, sure, but I don't know necessarily if we needed that. There's this kind of family element that they kind of want to keep pushing. And yes, I know that they want a little extra narrative there, but I don't know necessarily if we needed that as well. It's just kind of there's almost a bookend here that I saw could have been just we could have ended it, but then they tack on a little extra.
Yeah.
Which for me was just kind. I was like, oh, we could wrap this up and really call it a day.
We'll have to dive into spoilers on that because I'm very mixed on that as well. It feels like maybe there were different plans for what that is, and they kind of couldn't maybe make a couple things work. So they had to go with something else because they didn't want to cut it. I could see why they'd want to do that, but like to me, I agree with you. I think that it's a little bit like the story didn't need it. I think like it wrapped up fine. And I do gotta say, you mentioned something as we walked out of the theater that I completely agree with. Again, I have to dance around spoilers. There is a choice made at the third act of this film that I do feel I didn't necessarily love. I thought that it created some great action and some really fun, again, gory, effects driven scenes. But it was one of those things where I just thought, I feel like for what we've done the entire film with these characters, I don't necessarily think that would have been the route that I would have taken it. I think that they left it in one spot, and I thought, "Ooh, that's really ballsy and cool. That's great." But they quickly kind of double back to it. It's not terrible. It just kind of feels like to me very that's when the movie feels predictable. That's when things start to feel a bit more samey as opposed to something that was very good at kind of pulling the rug out from under me for so long in this film.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that. That's something where you mentioned ballsy when it's kind of a belief during a certain instance, and I think that was a great kind of abrupt closure that I thought would have been a great element to kind of keep moving the story. But then as you kind of backpedal, and again they kind of push this family element, which I don't think you necessarily need in a film like this. But I think they kind of wanted to emphasize that, and it just feels, I don't know, a little forced for me, and it just was like kind of how are we gonna finish the story off? Whereas if you kind of left that out, I think that even adds to the tension of what's the ending here going to look like. So I don't think it needed it as well. It was just kind of one of those things where it's very general audience, very cinematic, something that your typical story does have, but it definitely did not need it. But didn't kill the story for me. I gotta say, had a lot of fun with the gore. Great cast, great acting, a lot of great scenes in here. So for me, this sits at a pretty strong recommend. I think we have had a drought. I was a fan of like Last Voyage of the Demeter,
Same.
but overall over the past, I'd say at least 4 years, we've had a drought of really good vampire flicks, and I got to say, Abigail is definitely a recommend for me.
Yeah, I'm gonna go recommend as well. I think that this is definitely, as opposed to, we both really enjoyed Last Voyage of the Demeter. I own that film. I like it a lot. I think that that film is a very different vampire movie than this. I see where the comparisons to what people were saying are coming from, because it's very much more in line with those, as opposed to like your traditional, more gothic style vampire. Like, there's a difference between Abigail and what we're going to see later this year with Nosferatu. Like, that's the best way I can put it. You get two different styles of vampire, and this is the more fun, in your face, we're going to really throw a lot of things at you kind of vampire, as opposed to the more dark, methodical, kind of slower paced story, which both can work. But Abigail works in the way that they're trying to do it. And I got to say, yes, this is a recommend for me. I enjoyed this. I had fun. Definitely going to be something that I revisit. And honestly, I got to say, I'm really happy to be back on Team Radio Silence for this one. Again, Scream, I know a lot of people love it. We were kind of in the middle on a lot of that. But this is definitely, again, I want to see these guys do more original stuff like this. Let them keep writing things that are just kind of off the wall, give them new stuff like this. And I think that they're in good places. We'll see how Ready or Not 2 pans out. Don't necessarily know how I feel about them doing a sequel to that. But hey, let us know down below what you guys think of Abigail if you've gotten a chance to see it. And yes, we will be doing a spoiler review of this, which will be up on Sunday. So keep your eyes out for that. I know for a fact at least Luke and I will be taking part in that. But we'll see if we can round up maybe a guest or two. But yeah, other than that, we got a lot of great stuff up on the channel. So until next time, guys, I am Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
And remember, stay scared.
Do the hard shit, gonna do it live. Cause Splattercast kick it every day they live. Splattercast, gonna smash your ass. 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 Splattercast, gonna smash your ass.